Yeah. So question number 7 is about x and y, which are being defined right in the beginning of the question. And they are both taken to be bigger than 1. And question number 8, B8 is where alpha and beta are any numbers. They're not related to bigger than 1, less than 1, anything like that. That's the difference.
Okay, sir, I got it. I got it. Thank you, sir.
Anything else? So before I forget, tomorrow we will have a class as planned, but it will be a very short class, half an hour, because at 11 o'clock I have to leave for a meeting of CMI, important meeting at CMI only, our board of trustees. So we'll have a half an hour session.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So let me share my screen. So we are this one, and maybe tomorrow also, a little bit tomorrow, we might continue our discussion about please mute when you are not speaking, so that yeah, let me share screen. Yeah, so today and maybe part of tomorrow also, depends how much we make it today. The discussion will still be on our this R, okay? Yeah, on the set of real numbers, and so this is something from the just to recall what we have given in the set of exercises, that these are our basic properties, and addition, multiplication, then we have an order and we relate it to addition, multiplication, okay? And then some questions were sent to you to do, and basically anything that we know about real numbers that we have used in school, we can bring it here and prove it using just these properties. If you think about something which I am not covering and you have difficulty in doing it, you can ask me. If you think it is important but I have missed it, you can do it. You can share it with everybody in the class also. Okay. All right. Now, R is least upper bound property, and we use supremum and infimum to call the least upper bound and greatest lower bound as infimum. So supremum of a set is least upper bound, infimum of a set is greatest lower bound. And we kind of used this earlier, but we didn't really know that supremum, infimums exist. So now also, hopefully, you already know the difference between supremum and maximum. Okay. So maximum requires the term to be in that set, only then it is called a maximum. Otherwise, in general, supremum. Likewise, yeah. So Amit, you want to say something?
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a doubt. For example, alpha is equal to 1.99999 till infinite, and to beta is equal to 2. Then what is the number which is present between them? Maybe rational or irrational.
Okay. So firstly, 1.999999, etc. is not making sense in our system as yet. Okay. Right? We have rationals, and then we have least upper bounds, and so on,
Sir,
which is closed under least upper bound property. Okay. So the infinite expansions, etc., will come only after we talk about sequences and summation of infinite sequences and so on and so forth. But to return to your question, nonetheless, informally, the decimal expansions can be brought into this system only when we either rule out recurring zeros or we rule out recurring nines. Okay. One of the two.
Okay, sir.
Okay. When we do that, then we can actually use that to formally construct the set of real numbers as infinite expansions, etc. All right. But we need to rule out one of the two. Since we may not want to rule out integers, which is ending with a 0 recurring, we may rule out 9 recurring and then reconstruct everything. But then we'll have to start what is addition, what is multiplication, and then verify all the properties we have written. That's possible. But that has nothing to do with decimal with 10. It can be done with any, in particular with binary expansions or any other expansion as well. But anything else? Let's see, there's a question. Sir, we discussed that any subset of real number has supremum. So what's the maximum supremum of 0 to infinity? Yeah, so we got an answer that we have said least upper bound exists for a subset which has bounded above, not otherwise. Correct. That is the answer. All right. So now some simple observations, simple things about real numbers that we know and we use here and there, but maybe it was not done in the class. It is not perhaps given in your other exercise, but I'm listing it here. You'll of course see the PDF as well as the video, and you can try to do them. They are not very difficult. And if you have difficulties also, you can see pages 5, 6, 7, 8 from Rudin's book, the one which has been suggested. Talk to each other, whatever. So, for example, number 2. X is positive, y less than z, then x times y is less than x times z. Now we had similar thing which was required as an assumption for addition, but for multiplication we can reduce that once we have the thing for addition and the other connections we have. So you can check this with yourself, and once we get ordering via multiplication, then you can get that a square is always less than b square. If a is less than b, a power n less than b power n for all integers n, and so on and so forth. So you can. All right. So today, one of the first and main tasks today is proving that nth roots exist. In particular, square root exists. Because remember, all our things started with, historically, it started with square root 2 not being there in the system, okay, of rational numbers. Somebody could prove that it's not a rational number, and that's where historically the thought about how do we want to expand our rational numbers started. So square root of 2 or square root of n, the work required is about the same, so we might as well do it with square root of n. And what is the all other properties are satisfied by rational numbers. The only thing we have added is the least upper bound property. So it is very clear that to do this, we need to use the least upper bound property. Okay. And so heuristics first. So if u power n is less than equal to a, and we can talk about nth root. So nth root of u power n will be u, nth root of a will be what we are looking for, b. We as yet don't know, but nth root of a. So what we do, we list all numbers u which are positive, because negative and squares and so on, all kinds of issues will come. So we take only u's which are positive and look at all the set of all u's such that u power n is less than equal to a. And once we are able to show that this is within our system, we can get its supremum. We should be able to argue that that supremum better be the number b we are looking for. Okay, so that's heuristics. But now we have to do this using the axioms that we have got. So to start least upper bound property, we need two things. One, as was pointed out in the chat box, namely, we need to show that it is bounded above. Also, it has to be non-empty. If it is an empty set, then least upper bound we will go to minus infinity, right? So to speak. So non-empty set which is bounded above has a least upper bound. That's the property. So we wrote down F down. We need to show that there is a F. This set F is non-empty and this set is bounded above. Once we do that, then we can start with supremum and then try to argue that that supremum is essentially the number we are looking for. Okay. So here is, there can be many approaches to this, by the way. Okay. You are welcome to try a different proof. Okay. All right. So to show that it is non-empty, you do the following. So you take W to be A divided by A plus 1. A is positive. So A divided by A plus 1 is bigger than A. So when you divide A by A plus 1, you will get it to be less than 1. So using this properties of real numbers from our axioms or the few simple things that we have written down, it will follow that A by A plus 1 is less than 1. Okay. Now, once A by A plus 1 is less than 1, so W is less than 1. W is also less than A because we are dividing it by a larger number bigger than 1. So W will be larger, less than equal to A, and W being less than 1 will tell you that W power n is less than equal to W. So, you know, this, for example, the axiom 2 here, 2 and 3, which are things about real multiplication and ordering, in concluding that W power n less than equal to W less than equal to A. Okay. So W is in F and F is non-empty. Now, if you take 1 plus A to the power n, we can write down the use so-called binomial theorem to write down the n terms, and you just take 2 terms out of that. The rest are all non-negative. So 1 plus A power n is bigger than equal to 1 plus NA, and in particular that is bigger than equal to A. So it follows that F has an upper bound. So we have proven that it is non-empty, it has an upper bound. Therefore, least upper bound of F exists. We call it supremum and write it as B. And B is bigger than 0 because every upper bound or any upper bound of this will be bigger than 0.
So I had a question. So is there some reason we took 1 plus A? Never mind.
Well, it in one go proves both these properties, that W is less than equal to A and W power n is less than equal to W, which is in turn less than equal to A. Okay. You can do many things. I'm not saying that this is the only thing you can do.
So here actually we show that 1 plus A whole to the power n is one of the upper bound of the set. Right.
Yeah, so many things one can, you can write various different ways of writing the proof. Yeah. So 1 plus A power, yeah,
So we could even take A plus 1 as the upper bound.
sorry?
Like we could take even A plus 1 as an upper bound because it's more than A, so it's more than the nth root of A.
See, as I've told you, you can write many different ways of writing the proofs. Okay. Well, the difficulty is A is only positive. A is not bigger than 1. Okay. So when A is less than 1, A square is actually less than A. So you have to be careful.
Yes.
Okay, just you have to be careful in this. To claim that 1 plus a is the upper bound will work when a is bigger than 1, but when a is less than 0, may not. Maybe it is, but probably it is, because if a is less than 1, then u power n less than 1 will tell you that nth root will be less than 1. So every element in f will be less than 1, and 1 itself will be an upper bound. So only thing is you have to write cases, that's all, separately. So nothing canonical about this proof. Perhaps I was reading Rudin, and Rudin used this, so I've just taken it from there. But one can take many different ways of writing this proof, that non-empty, and only thing here we need to show is we need to show something is in there, and it has an upper bound. Okay. All right. So after that, we have got a B, which is a supreme, exists. Now we have to argue that that B itself is such that B power n is equal to A. Intuitively, it is clear, but we have to prove that using only the things which we have given, or we have simple observations we have made. And so once again, this could be simplified. This looks a bit too complicated, but I don't know. Again, essentially from Rudin, but somebody can come out with a shorter proof, great. So,
And isn't all we are saying is like, if there's a root which is not precise, which is nth power of which is precisely not b, then you can find between that number and b a nth rational power.
yeah. But at the moment, all we have is we have not given that B is the nth root.
No, I'm saying I'm saying like whatever b is, if b to the n is not a, then we can find a rational nth rational power between b to the n and a. Isn't
Essentially that is we don't have to. Yeah, essentially that is what is going to be proven here. Okay.
Yes, that was what I was saying. Like the argument in itself is like the intuition is just that, right?
Yeah, intuition is that, but you see, intuition is that, correct. Okay. But one needs to write down the proof, at least in the beginning. Once we say that, okay, from now on, we will just assume that R has all these properties, then we can go along. But when you are asked to prove, this is training you that how you can proceed axiomatically. So all you are given is these axioms. That's it. Okay. Beyond that, you are not given anything else. So how do we now show that B power n is equal to A? So first step is that for u less than v and integer n is an integer. Somebody could argue that why worry about integer? Won't the same proof work with all? But no, some of the steps we are using actually are integers, positive integers. So for any u and v bigger than u, we know this v power n minus u power n is written as is this. Okay. You can expand and cancel common terms and so on, and you can verify that it holds for our real number system that we have introduced. Okay. So this v minus u times this how many terms? N terms, I guess, inside. And then each of these terms in turn, v is bigger. Okay. So the first term here is bigger than all the terms that follow. So whatever there in the second bracket is less than or equal to n times the first term, because the first term dominates all the other terms. Okay. So
we just substitute v in place of u, right? And as v is greater than u. Yes.
See, is substitution legal under these rules? You have to argue.
Okay, sir.
So instead of substitution, all I'm saying is that this is this. If term wise you show that v power n minus 1 is greater than equal to every term, that's it. Okay. So you can write the proof using substitution also, that if you substitute u by v, you will be expanding every term. And then the right hand side will be n times v power n minus 1. But at least for this part, you do not use any terminology which is not given to you. Okay. So therefore, va power n minus u power n is this. Now we will take the two cases that b power n is less than a and get a contradiction, and b power n bigger than a will get a contradiction. Okay. So if b power n is less than a, here is some clever trick. So you take a lambda. You basically wanted to take lambda to be just a minus b power n, the difference divided by this common thing, a multiplier in this. Okay. But to ensure that it is less than 1, you take minimum of this and 1. And now look at b power, b plus, you expand b plus gamma, expand b by this gamma, and you're going to show that if b power n is less than a, then something larger than b is inside f, and that will be a contradiction that b is an upper bound. That is where we are heading to. But if b power n is less than a, we can increase b by something little more, and then its nth power will still be less than a, and that will tell you that b plus that little bit we have added is in f, and that will be a contradiction. That's the idea. So now b plus gamma power n minus b power n, we use this first result, this assessment, or this inequality that we have written for all our numbers. So v minus u will give you gamma, and the second term is exactly this n b plus gamma power n minus 1. And where is gamma less than 1 being used? Well, gamma is less than 1, so this b plus gamma power n minus 1 is less than equal to b plus 1 power n minus 1. And now gamma is less than equal to each of them. So gamma is less than equal to b minus a minus b power n divided by this. Multiply by that, you will get that gamma times n b plus a power n minus 1 less than equal to b minus a minus b power n. So and now minus b power n minus b power n cancel. So you get b plus a power n is less than equal to a. So b plus gamma therefore is in f, which contradicts.
So I didn't get the last equality. Just repeat how
What?
we get that. The last in this chain, I didn't understand how the last inequality arises.
Last one. Okay.
Yeah.
Gamma is less than equal to minimum of this. So gamma is less than equal to both of them. So in particular, gamma is less than the first term here, a minus b power n divided by n b plus 1 n minus 1.
Oh, right. Yeah, I see.
Okay. So sometimes, when you start seeing a proof, you don't understand why gamma is defined by this weird expression. Okay. So this is like you try various things, something works, and now you write down the concise proof of what you are claiming. Okay. So that is how this has come. You could come up with something simpler. Okay. So whole idea is that b power n less than a, that you bring in something above b, which should continue to be in f. That was the whole idea. Okay. And this contradicts that b is an upper bound, because b plus something is already in the set f. Therefore, this is not true. Therefore, b power n cannot be less than n. So b power n better be greater than equal to a. Now we are going to get contradiction if we take b power n is bigger than a. This time we should subtract something and go below a. That will also. So So first one, I've just I've copied that observation from the previous slide. We have already seen the first line earlier. Now, if b power n is bigger than a, then you do the following. Now, this time you don't need to do this +1 minimum, etc., etc. Let gamma be something which is just less than this quantity. B power n is bigger than a, so numerator is bigger than 1. Denominator is anyway positive, n times b power n minus 1. So the ratio is something positive. So we take a, I should have said, let gamma be. All right. Now, how can we observe that gamma is less than b? Well, gamma is certainly less than b power n divided by this, whatever is in the denominator. We just take out this minus a by something term. So you would have increased. And then b power n divided by b power n minus 1 will give you b and b by n. So a gamma is actually less than b by n, and therefore it is less than b. Okay. And now you do this again. Here v equal to b and u equal to b minus gamma. So you will get that this power n less than equal to n times n b n minus 1. And that is in turn less than b power n minus a. So essentially same as last one, except that a little bit there we had to get +1 minus etc. etc. Here that one is saved, and we will get b power n is common. So when we take it out and the negative sign will reverse the inequality. So we will get b minus gamma power n is bigger than a. So b minus gamma is itself an upper bound. That means b is not the least upper bound. Okay. So once again, if b power n is bigger than a, you can reduce it a little so that that reduced part still remains an upper bound of f, and that will contradict. And exactly the opposite of what was in the last time. So therefore, both the options have been ruled out. It cannot be less than, it cannot be bigger than. And we had this one primary thing that, order equation, that given any two, one of the three always holds. So therefore, b power n is equal to a. And that is the meaning we are giving to b is nth root of a. So using just what have been given to us or some elementary properties that can be deduced from it, okay, we have shown that once we have assumed that our real numbers are satisfying the simple addition multiplication property, the order relation, things, and least upper bound property, it is it admits square roots, positive integers. It admits nth root of positive, not just integers, sorry, nth root of all positive numbers. It includes already. All right. Any other question? Any question rather?
Sir, could you wait on this slide?
This one?
Yes, just for like a copy.
Sure. Okay, somebody has asked a question. Let me read what is the question. No, so Soham has asked a question and I don't understand. If it is true, then there exists an element in the set C. Which set? F.
No,
capital F?
sir, not the set C, the set of real numbers such that any element of that set to the power n is less than equals to a, the set you assumed earlier in the proof.
So this, so the C is in capital F. You are asking, is that?
Now, C is an element of that set.
Yeah, element of that set, capital F.
Yeah.
So, no, why will it follow? Because I don't see your argument here clearly. B power n is bigger than A. Yes, then why should?
Sir, actually between any two real numbers, there exists another real number, but that is in the set that has to be ensured actually.
How will you ensure
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
Yes.
Like Shivam,
No,
I think the
I
point
mean,
was to, sorry. what?
For any set, if it has a least upper bound, then if we take any other element which is less than the least upper bound, we will have an element of that set which is in between those two numbers.
No, you see, that set is the problem. Capital, you should say which set you are talking about. Capital F.
F, here is F.
No, why will it be in capital F? It will be a real number, but how do you show that it is in the capital F?
Because if it is if there is not any element of capital F, then
So the point is to show that C is an nth power, right? And then to prove that it's an nth power of something that's less than B2.
It doesn't have to be an nth power.
No, to prove it's in the set F, it has to be a power of a real number. That's the point, right? Any, like it need not even be n, it could be m, but you have to prove that it's a power of a
Then
real
that's
number.
a
And that's what
valid
this proof does.
contradiction.
Get a contradiction. So basically, I think maybe what you have written, you can add arguments and complete that, but just as given here, it will not be accepted as a argument. Okay. Okay. Another question is, sir, will it work for negative numbers as well as odd roots? Negative numbers, yes, serious issues. Square root of negative number is not there. Okay. You don't have any real number whose square will be equal to -1.
So he's talking about the odd roots, like 1/3, 1/3, like third root, fifth root, and so on.
So the -1. So you prove for positive ones, and then for odd ones, you also say that it also works with negatives. Yeah. But when you are talking of nth roots, you usually only talk about positive numbers. You can make this sense for odd roots of negative numbers, but it doesn't add anything, right?
Sir, I just have a quick question here. If the value of a minus b to the power n by b plus 1 to the power n minus 1, this thing inside the minimum other than 1, if that is actually greater than 1, then gamma becomes 1, right?
Wait. Let me go to the previous slide. So yeah, this one now. What is?
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you properly. What were you saying?
Yes, sir. I'm saying what if gamma equals 1? So what if the minimum is actually 1? Like, does the proof still work? Like if the minimum is the other thing, then obviously it works, since that's why we define gamma like that. But if it's not, then if gamma is just 1, then does the proof still work?
Why not?
Then obviously a minus b power n is greater than n into b plus 1 into n minus 1.
Gamma equal to 1. Why will it not work? I don't see any reason why it should not work.
Okay, sir.
Okay. I see no contradiction if gamma was 1. All I'm saying is gamma is b plus gamma less than equal to b plus 1 and gamma less than equal to the first term here. These are the only two properties we are using.
Yes, sir, yes, sir. Okay, it's good. It's completely.
Yeah. All right. So, but there could be other ways of writing the proof. I'm not ruling them out, but the arguments could be longer also. Doesn't matter. Shortness of argument is not required. It's just that in writing books, people try to do, don't go on and try to get a shortest argument. Okay. So I think why I'm spending so much time here, I could have just said read from Rudy's book, but then that's not the point. Some things I will tell you to just read, like I said, that these properties, they are easy enough to deduce, and if you have difficulty, talk to each other or read from the book. Okay, they are fairly simple. But the proving the cube roots, nth roots, this is an important property, and it is going to be the basis for lots of other things which will follow. And to see how one can show it using the properties we have assumed of the set is important, and that is what we have done. Okay, and the least upper bound property has been critically used. Okay, if this is not there, the whole thing breaks up. It doesn't work. Okay. So, so we have shown that take any so for any a positive and a positive integer n, there exists a b, that b power n is equal to a, and then we denote it as nth power of nth root of a. Okay. Now, the nth root of a we have written, but it can also be expressed as b is equal to a to the power 1 over n. Okay. And for a positive integer m, it will follow that if you take b power m, that will be equal to a power m by n. I'm trying m and n integers, because b power m is just b times b m times. It's a power 1 by n, a power 1 by n. You do n times, you will get it is. Or rather, we can say that this is the meaning we give to a power m by n. If you take its nth power, then that will be like a power m. Okay. So using nth root of a as an anchor, writing it also as a power 1 by n, we start having a meaning of a power m by n. So you take a power 1 over n and then raise it to the power m, and you call that to be a power m by n. So we are kind of reintroducing things which we have learned in school early years. Okay, but now giving a meaning based on our axioms of the set R. So from nth root of every positive number a in our set R, we have gone up to writing a power m by n, where m and n are integers. So now we have gone to, for every rational number t, which is d equal to a power t makes sense, is what now I am going to argue. If t equal to 0, we define d to be equal to 1. So this a power 0, when a is not 0, 0 power 0 remains undefined. Remember, okay? So For if A is positive, then A power 0 we define as 1. For T negative, we take D to be, you take 1 by A to the power S, where S is minus T. And T positive integer we have already defined. T a positive rational we have already defined. M by N we have defined already. So this way, from nth root, we have quickly jumped up to writing the A power T. So take a number A is positive and A power T, where T is a rational number, gets defined. And with this, the following can be shown, that A power T plus 1, T plus S is A power S times T power A power T.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I have a doubt.
Yeah.
Why do we define for negative rationals the power exponentiation as such? I mean, is there any benefit, or why do we define in this following way?
Okay, there are two questions. Why do we define it and why do we define it this way?
No. My question is just why do we define it in this way?
Oh.
Not why do we define it?
Okay, so the point is, let's again start backwards. So we would like to define A power S or A power T, both, where S is positive or negative or 0 or everything. And our guiding principle is this property. Okay. A power S plus T is A power S times A power T. That is our guiding property. Clear? And here, what meaning do we want to give to A power minus 1? A power minus 1 we have already given a meaning. A power minus 1 is 1 over A, the multiplicative inverse of A. Okay. So using that, it makes sense to me, at least, to give this definition of A power T if T is negative. You take
Okay, sir.
Huh?
I mean, we define it so that this particular property holds. That's the
Correct.
reason.
Correct.
Okay.
See, let's forget this real business. Let's go back to, the simpler world where all our things are only rationals. From reals, from integers, we went to rationals and we defined powers. Okay. And even for rationals, if you have to define this always for any, A is also rational and S and T are rational. A is a rational but positive, and S and T are any rationals. We want to define A power S in some way. This would be a natural way of defining even for rationals. Then we just copy it also for reals. Okay. So now comes the next step. So cube root to this was very quick, if you saw. Cube root itself took longer time than just jumping from cube root of A to A power any rational number. And we have also observed that I didn't write it down, but you can write down these steps using the simple assumptions we have made and simple observations that we have made about addition and multiplication. How do they work with this new set? Okay. The least upper bound property comes into proving one such example, one such condition. Once it is there, then verifying these is just straight away. Okay. So we didn't spend time here. But now we want to do A power X for every X in R, not just every rational, but for every R. Okay. And again, guiding light is that we want to do, if S and T are reals, we would again want it to continue to use this expression. For all ST in R also, this one should work. That is the idea. Any ideas? Some of you may have seen books, but
we can define it as if you have any rational less than x, let's say r, then a to the r must be less than a to the x, and for any rational s which is greater than x, a to the s must be greater than a to the x if a is greater than 1, and the reverse if a is less than 1.
Yeah, but if you have to, what you said is correct, but then how will we show that such an object exists? And that's where the least upper bound property will again come in.
Yes, I mean, like I just said the idea that is provable for me.
So that's what I wrote, that taking Q from what we know about m power n, we first take focus on a bigger than 1, then we can go to a less than 1 and fix a number x in R, again x positive. So a positive bigger than 1, x bigger than 0. Other cases we can take care of them right away subsequently. And let's take all powers of a power t, where t is positive, t is a rational number, t is positive and is between 0 and x. These are objects which we have already worked up. A power a rational number. And now you take this we can argue is bounded above and is non-empty. Both these properties you can show. Okay. Because you can take x by 2 and you can get that there is a rational number between x by 2 and x. So there is a t there already, and therefore a power t makes sense. And likewise, you can go to x and 2x, there will be a rational number there already, and that will be on the other side. So things like that you can do to show that this G is non-empty and has a upper bound. I have already defined. You don't have to show anything existence here. Yeah. So all a power t where t is in this set. So there is a t here which is real. So there is non-empty, and there will be a real number which is above x, and therefore it has upper bound. So now we take the least upper bound of this, and let me just for now call it a function, little g of a comma x. Okay. You have taken a power t for every t less than x, real, positive and rational, every t less than. That is my capital G, and the least upper bound I am calling little g of a comma x. Now we can verify that for x in Q, that is if x was rational, then this function is exactly a power x. This least upper bound property. And for x less than y, we can verify that g of ax is less than g of ay. Because there will be a rational number in between. Okay. So the least upper bound for the first set will be less than least upper bound for the second set. And now we define this itself to be a power x. And now we can verify various things that we want to. Before that, we will have to go to the case what if between a is equal to 1, what if a is between 0 and 1, and what if x is less than 0. All that we have to do still.
Sir, can you explain the last step once again? I mean, for rational, g of a comma x is a to the power x, that I understood, but after that.
Okay, after that for ax less than y, we observe this property. So if x is less than y, one has to first argue that there is a rational number between the two of them. Perhaps it was there in the exercise, or
yes sir, yes sir.
Okay, so there is a t in between. So for let's call it z, a real number z which is in between these two. So z is not in the capital G which is defining GAX, but that Z will be in the corresponding G, which is defining GAY. Okay. So using that, one can check that GAX is less than GAY, the least upper bound property.
Okay, sir.
So at the moment, this function GAX, we have observed that for when X is rational, it is just a power X, and then it has this inequality property. So therefore, effectively, one of you who had argued was that you look at a power t for every t, go from below and go from above, and you need to show that there is a real number which is sandwiched between the two, and that is sandwiched is exactly this G of AX. Okay. Therefore, we call that a power X. As yet, we have defined this a power X only for a bigger than 1 and for X positive. And for these we can verify from reals, from rationals that we had this property, we can verify that it continues to hold for this least upper bound business. For X less than 0, we take U to be minus X, and then a power X is 1 by a to the power U. We define a power 0 to be 1. So that at 0 it is a is bigger than 1, and so on. So non-zero. A and 1 over a both will be non-zero. So as yet a is bigger than 1 or 0, and we have defined a power X for all X by expanding it to negatives. And then finally, we were going to relax that a is greater than equal to 1. If a is between 0 and 1, we have a inverse is 1 over a, and therefore b as 1 a minus, and then we'll write this. So this completes writing the proof for a power X, defining a power X, and maybe some steps are needed to verify that we have expanded it in such a way that as long as a is strictly positive and X and Y are any reals, a power X plus Y is a power X times a power Y. So yeah, in a sense, least upper bound property, we have most other proofs work by simple earlier equations, earlier relationships, other relationships. Least upper bound was used in the Archimedean proof of Archimedean thing holds. It has been used explicitly for defining a power X, where a is bigger than 0 and X is any real number. And it has been used twice, once in defining nth root, then a power t, and then a power X. Okay. And I was trying to recall, I tried to read the book and also trying to recall my memory. What other properties on real numbers other than involving functions, just operations with rational numbers themselves that we know that we need to expand to real numbers, or we have implicitly assumed them earlier and now we are returning to prove them. Right? Like when we did sine, cosine, drew graphs, viewed everything, we didn't care that square root 2 is not a rational number. What do we mean by? We just assumed that all that is making sense. Now we have come back and have fixed this. Okay. But as of now, sine, cosine, we have yet to talk about. But involving functions, involving just real numbers or rational numbers which we had proven and real numbers which we used. A power x is one thing which is very obvious and so obvious that it is even listed in the curriculum. If you see the CMI website and look at your topics to be covered in analysis 1, this is listed. So by the way, I don't normally teach analysis course. I teach things related with probability. And this time I thought that, okay, let me teach analysis course. So therefore, what exactly to teach? I'm following it from the curriculum which has been listed in the syllabus or which listed in the website for analysis 1. That is what I am following. And there, so it is important enough to be listed there. Okay. Now, offhand, let's see. Any other? Okay, there is no other message on the chat. All right. So, can you think of any other property that involves only real numbers that as yet we have not covered? It could be something very simple we'll observe, or something may require a lot more proof.
Sir, I'm not sure this is what you're looking for, but there do exist, actually, not sorry, I hadn't organized my thoughts. I'll think about it and I'll come back to it.
Okay. So sums, products, and powers. Okay.
So we use the order relation in here to define the exponentiation. Can we define the exponentiation without using the orders of the real numbers?
Can we?
For a while, we will, if we have to define this in complex, if we have to extend this, then we would have to forget the order there. I don't know exactly.
Wait. One thing at a time. As yet, you see, to go from all rational numbers to real numbers, okay, I think ordering is bringing in order is important. Maybe it is possible to do it without. I don't know. I can't rule it out. But at least offhand, I can't think of doing it without the order. Okay. Because other than this, as yet we have yet to talk about sequence of functions and so on and so forth, sequence of numbers and limits thereof. Other way to do it will be to first do that and then do the exponentiation. That could be the other way.
Okay, sir. And sequences.
Bringing in sequences, and then you show that given a real number, there will always exist a sequence of rationals which will converge to it, and use that. Okay.
In fact, bringing in the absolute value in terms. Bringing in the absolute value there, and we would have to assume order probably in the the definition of limit. I should usually order from the epsilon delta. So,
see,
bringing in the absolute value.
You see, that is where a proof that we give uses order doesn't mean that without it, it cannot be done. Okay.
Okay.
So our proof is using order, but can exponentiation be defined without bringing in the order? Probably yes. There may be some way of doing it. Now, as one of you said, for when you have to do away with it when you want to go to complex numbers. It's not in our curriculum, so I'm not going to spend too much time on complex numbers. But the simplest way of doing it for complex numbers will be to define complex numbers in terms of real numbers, and you have the exponentiation on real numbers, use that to do it for complex. So that's not doing away with ordering completely. Okay.
Okay, sir.
But through limits is another way of doing exponentiation. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Anything else that somebody would like to say?
Actually, sir, sorry, I just had a question about what you meant by ordering. If I understand it correctly, you mean like to a real number, you have a sequence of rational numbers that converge to it, and the order of the rational numbers that you choose to converge is similar to like in that diagonalization, thing about the cardinality.
Wait. So showing existence of these numbers can be done using order, but it can be done without the order also. Okay.
No, sir, I was asking the order in question here is like the order in which you list out the rational numbers, right? Like.
No. The order question was, the order is being used left and right everywhere, right? I mean, all these proofs used order, this less than this, therefore this, etc., etc. So order question, I don't know what exactly he meant, but I took it in that spirit that what if, you did not, you had not brought in the order and you just had, let's say, these 11 things, and then somehow you got an R with the least upper bound property, but have not connected order. I don't know what exactly is meant, because you see, it's very difficult to understand a question which says that what can you do it without bringing in the order? The order may be entering the picture in some indirect way. Just like for complex, I said that, if we use with reals, then we are using it for reals and then using it in complex. So things like that.
Okay, sir. Okay. So because I just thought that order meant like when you list out the rational numbers, right? Like because they're a countable set, you can choose a sequence of them that converge to any like real number, and the order of the rational numbers when you list it out. I thought he was talking about that.
No. You don't need the order when you're talking about limits.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, and as for absolute value and limits, well, you can do limits without bringing in absolute value. Right? You say mod fx minus fy minus fa, fb minus fa. But instead of mod, you say fb minus a, fa bigger than something and less than something. So, order, I mean, absolute value can be done away in the limit arguments.
No, I meant the norm in general, which reduces to absolute value in the real case.
No, but it can be done even without the norms. So, see, one has to be very careful in saying that to use that argument, we need this property. It is possible it can be done without that property. Okay, it's possible. I don't have an immediate solution how to do it, but it's possible. Okay, so one in making such claims, one has to be ultra careful. The proof that we know uses this is the best way of saying it. And I'm sure those who work in, not so much in analysis, but those who work with, who know basic and who have of course learned basic analysis and then work in algebra, may be best suited to answer these questions, that can it be done without order or not done without order. Okay. They'll immediately start thinking about something which I'm maybe missing. But one should see it in the right spirit, namely, after all, you have already done a whole lot of things with real numbers. Okay. But now we are trying to say that, well, what you did was not quite formal. Now we are giving it formalization. Okay. Now, one should learn this, but one should spend limited amount of time on it. Okay. Otherwise, we can go on and on. What are the alternate ways of doing it? Is this necessary? For example, I have now listed here right now what you are seeing, 11 properties. Okay. Are all these 11 required? Can we say remove one and it will follow from the rest? All such questions are there. we have not given too much, I have not given too much thought or have not spent too much time in trying to do writing down minimal set of axioms which will do this. Okay. Because our aim is to show that there is something on the chat. I'll come to it in a minute, but there's some, our aim is to quickly come up with what axioms are needed, and later we'll do a construction. I've informally already talked to you about a construction via decimal expansions, and then get back to formalizing convergence, derivatives, and so on and so forth. Okay, continuity derivatives in this formal language. So today and maybe tomorrow's half hour that we do tomorrow, that is our last thing that we will spend time on, this axiomatic way of constructing R. After that, we will pretend as if we know what R is and we have these properties and we are continue to use it. Second semester, we'll come back and give one construction formally. That's it. Because each of these is interesting. One can spend time on it, but we need to learn and move on. Okay. Yeah. So Romit Roy has said existence of infimum G, question mark. Well, just like least upper bound property for a set, we can say greatest lower bound. Given a set,
for things that we haven't proved yet.
huh?
You're asking for things that we haven't proved yet, so I suggested.
Okay. Okay, but I think I spoke about it at least yesterday or today or whenever, that similarly the least upper bound can be defined and that gives you infimum. Okay, but yeah. So 5 more minutes remaining, so I will not start anything different, but so basic set theory in the sense of sets and functions and definition of a function, that I assume you all are familiar with, and that is what we will use a starting point when we want to start discussing sequences. Okay, and we should know that I maybe said also earlier that historically a series came in naturally, and then when they tried to formalize the series, they realized that you should first formalize sequences A sub n, and then you can talk about summation A sub n. Okay, so we are going to start by sequences, and some simple things that we will be doing, but you can think about it tonight. That take a monotonically increasing sequence of numbers. Okay. Assume it is bounded above. Then we can use this least upper bound property to argue that the least upper bound of that is essentially what we are looking at as the limit. Because if you proceed, if you go even a little below, that will be exceeded because of our least upper bound property. And if you go above, we will never reach anywhere close to it because of the least upper bound property. So for a monotonically increasing sequence, the least upper bound property gives you a way of saying that every such sequence, there is a limit. What limit means, we can take this as a definition, more general definition, epsilon n definition, whatever definition. But informally, the least upper bound property gives you a way of showing that every sequence which is bounded above, every monotone sequence which is bounded above, there is a limit. Okay, and that is so unless there are more questions that anyone puts in about this axiomatic way of doing real numbers, or today something I discovered that I should have done but I have not done, we will do that tomorrow. And if not, we will start with the sequences and their this business about monotone sequences and in general defining limits. Okay. So we will do it fairly fast because you have in a sense done these things earlier. But where does this formal expression comes into the picture? We will spend time, and where informal, we continue. So the definition of what is a limit, you already know, and there is nothing that what we have done will add to that, because what we have done is formalizing what you know already. And if what the definition of limit, you have a sequence an, then we'll say that A is a limit if given a epsilon positive, there is a n such that for every n bigger than equal to n, mod an minus a less than epsilon. All that, there is no existence question is coming, so you can continue. We have already know that. What now important thing will be, what properties on a sequence we can ensure that limit will always exist. And one of them I pointed out, that if it is monotonically increasing, we can argue it exists. Monotonically increasing and bounded above, it exists. Likewise, monotonically decreasing and bounded below, we can again show it exists. Because you can take greatest lower bound, or you can take minus of that and it becomes a negative of a increasing thing. We can take that limit and then change the power again, change the sign again, okay, or multiply by -1 again. So what is, we will recall quickly, is the definition of a limit. What is new or what is formal is to show that monotonically increasing function, increasing sequence bounded above, then there is a limit, existence of limit. That is what we will be bringing in new. If something else comes to your mind when about limits and sequences, you do tell me tomorrow when we start. But yeah. So like the last session, today also I have at least, maybe not half an hour, but at least 15 minutes. So if somebody wants to stay back and ask questions, I'm around at least 15 minutes. And those who want to leave, of course, can leave. Our time is up and they can leave. I'm not going to do anything new.
Thank you, sir.
So we have a class at 11:50. So.
Yeah. So
thank you, sir.
What is the class, just for curiousness?
Classical mechanics.
Classical mechanics. Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
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 Okay.
So just out of curiosity, what's the current state of research in this analysis? Like, what are the open problems that we can get acquainted with from this point of view, from this knowledge point of view?
At this level, I'm afraid, at least I am not aware of. But analysis has gone way beyond, and then there are research problems. But real number systems and their research problem, at least I am not aware of. Okay. Infinite sequences, and then so something called functional analysis. So there can be some, or you go to matrices and define this analysis notions on matrices. Then there are some. Okay.
Spectral radiuses and all, like.
Sorry?
Spectral radiuses and all, convergence of norms, matrix norm, like the matrix norm cannot be greater than the spectral radius of that matrix.
Yeah, so various such things are known, but there are some problems there. Yeah. Okay. What if you try to define things slightly differently? Okay. So,
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir, I actually had a question
sure.
related to probability. So Anirudhan, like one of our seniors, right? He gave a talk the other day
Yeah.
on like an online math club about measure theory and probability. And then one of the, mainly about measure theory, but he talked about how, about a sigma algebra where like you do not allow infinite unions and intersections, right? You can have an like formulate probability on, let's say, sigma algebra where only finite intersections and unions are allowed. And he said that you did a lot of work in that area and you said that thinking about that. So could you tell me, like us, maybe where we can learn about it a little more? Sounds quite amazing.
I can certainly, so write a mail to me with this question. I can send you some links to read about it. I have book on it. I have things on it. I have papers on it. The interesting thing is that one thinks that whatever one has learned is an absolute must for everything. And this was one of the learning things there. So in probability, there is something called central limit theorem. And we all believed that without it, it cannot be done. And one of my colleagues, as a PhD student, he had just finished his thesis, senior to me. He told his advisor and Professor B.V. that he can prove central limit theorem without assuming the countable additivity. And they didn't believe. They asked him to present it. He says, you'll get 3 hours, but work out every step. And Professor B.V. asked me to be also present, though I had no clue about what is going to happen. And indeed, that was true. And that became a starting point for my foray into this aspect. So I will send you send me a mail, I will send you stuff on that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah.
So not everything can be done, but a lot of things can be done.
What did you explore this just out of intrinsic interest to see what would happen if you assumed this, or like was there like a real application in mind, something different that you could do assuming?
Okay. So for my friend, his name is S. Ramakrishnan. He is in US now, but for him, the starting point was he wanted to study Markov chains in finitely additive framework, for which again the origin comes from some gambling questions and some complicated problems which arise because of this countable additivity business. Okay, so there's a whole lot of literature on that dating back years, and something called Dubins and Savage and so on. So for him, that was the original thing. And for proving some things there, he needed central limit theorem. And so he worked out central limit theorem. So my initial thing was just for the heck of it, central limit theorem. He can prove that, then I can do this, I can do that, etc., etc. After my PhD, when I went to US as a postdoc and I worked with Professor Kalyanpur, there is an area called filtering theory. And there such a dichotomy existed that the theoreticians would require countable additivity in everything they write, but the engineers who used filtering theory would continue to work with finitely additive probabilities. They wouldn't care that if you don't have countable additivity. And then the problem we started was can we formalize whatever engineers are using in this framework? Okay. So it was not just for the heck of it, but something which people are already doing. So it started on that note. Okay.
Oh, that sounds amazing, sir. Thank you. I'll definitely send you the mail. Yeah.
And for any such thing, we can always have a chat session outside of our coursework, and we can expand not just your classmates, but anyone else to join also. So all these things we can do always. Okay.
Sir, I would always look forward for it. So do invite me if anything happens.
Okay. All right. You write a mail to me, because what has happened in the summer was that I was ill so much that right now I know Anand and Vijayan who are talking to me, but later I might forget. So that's why I said, just send a mail to me saying that please send us links on these matters, and I will send you.
Sure, sir.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for the class, sir. Yeah.
Okay. All right.